One. Awesome. There we go. We are live. So if you could just give a brief little intro of who you are and what you do, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Okay. So my name is Alden Wicker. I am a freelance journalist. I cover mostly sustainable fashion, but not always. And I've contributed to places like Newsweek, Inc. Magazine, Quartz, Refinery 29, Vox, lots of different places. And I'm always pitching more. And then I also have a blog called ecocult.com, where I've been blogging for almost 6 years around the sustainable lifestyle, but mostly about fashion again. So that's where I am.
Awesome. That's great. And I think the way that I had come across some of your stuff was I was starting to dig more into that space of how sustainability meets fashion.
Mm.
And I always thought it was interesting because it seemed like there was always some level of like a business's agenda being presented when this information was coming out. And I thought that it was really cool when I had started kind of trying to dive more into supply chains that I was seeing a lot of your posts show up across these different platforms. And I was diving into more of this stuff. And as I kept hearing your name more, I was like, wow, it seems like you're really one of the only voices that I've seen that kind of brings reason and like some sort of truth to that world, because people are putting a lot of information forward and you're kind of the
Mm.
only one really digging into this. Like, is that really the case? Or, like what else is going on here?
Well, I don't want to take all the credit. There are some other journalists who are also doing a great job. Elizabeth L. Klein is one. She has a new book coming out soon. She is the queen of this. She predicted Rana Plaza, the infamous garment factory collapse in Bangladesh. She sort of predicted that in her book, Overdressed, before it happened. She's incredibly smart. Jasmine Chua is another amazing journalist about that. So I'm not the only one, but compared to other fields, there's just not a lot of us who are focused on maybe what you would call traditional journalistic fact checking before we write things.
Totally. So how did you end up getting into this space? Like, so let's kind of back up because you had mentioned working for or freelancing with your brand Ecocult for 6 years now. Congrats. So
Thank you.
what did you do kind of like leading up to this whole thing, and how did you get into this space that you're in right now?
Sure. Well, I let's see. So I my one of my first internships, because of course we all have it, at, at Huffington Post. I got a job at a website that was providing personal finance advice to women specifically, and I worked under a couple of really amazing editors there. And then after a couple years, this was sort of like when a lot of media platforms were launching that were sort of like in between blogs and like media platforms, and also a lot of blogs. And I wanted to write a lot. I wanted to write more about sustainable fashion because, the food movement had already it had gotten really big around the time when I graduated from college, which was in 2009. And that had really changed my life for the better. And I thought, well, what other things are we not considering when we consume? And one of those things was fashion. And so from 2009 to 2013, there was a very slow buildup of a few more sustainable fashion brands, but it was still sort of in its cute phase. And then when I quit my job, I started to pick up some freelance assignments, and I quit my job in 2013, early 2013, and started really plotting to launch this blog around sustainable living, while also freelancing. And then a couple weeks after I soft launched it, Rana Plaza collapsed. And so then suddenly everyone was like, whoa, like, first of all, people make our clothes. And second of all, people die making our clothes. What is happening here? And then from there, everything really started accelerating. Like, not only were there a lot of fashion brands being launched, serious fashion brands of every type, of every style, then you started having really large companies getting in on this. And so, when I launched my blog, magazines did not, it was not a thing that they wanted to hear about. I had some early support from Refinery 29 every once in a while, but now we're getting to the point where almost everyone is interested in this topic. And so because it just encompasses everything, like it touches everything. So it's getting to the point where sort of the blog is sort of, it brings in some money, and also it's a place for me to workshop ideas and collect research and share it with people. But really I'm getting more into sort of deep research on topics around sustainable fashion for outlets with larger audiences.
Awesome. So I'd love to get more into kind of like the nitty gritty of the sustainability thing, but I also kind of want to go back to like the transition of you getting into more of that space. Like you had mentioned starting out with more of the food movement, and it seems like there's a lot of people that kind of make that connection of the movement of people really wanting to understand where their food's coming from, and that translation to what clothing is. And it's interesting how some people have made that switch or translation into clothing, and how that's played out at different timelines, kind of, because there's been some books that I've read that have been, I was talking with my previous guest, like 20 years old, and it seems like the information that they're providing is just now starting to be really relevant. And to think that someone was kind of at that intersection 20 years ago, but that there wasn't really, the industry wasn't really evolved around it. It's interesting to talk to people that are at different phases of that.
Yeah. So, well, fashion's interesting because, I'm sorry, I'm talking over you.
Oh no, it's all good.
You cut out a bit.
Keep going.
Okay. So, it's interesting because like the food movement really took off because I think that there was something valuable in that for people. I mean, at least for me, I was coming out of college and I was 25 pounds heavier than when I went in. I had chronic heartburn. I was just very unhealthy, and the food movement fixed that for me. Fashion, the promise of fashion is not as clear cut for people. And so I think that is why it's been a lot harder to push this movement forward, because there is some work being done around, say, how many toxic chemicals are still present on our clothes when we buy them from the store and what that might do to wear them on our skin. But it's just not as clear cut as sort of the benefits to paying more for organic or locally grown or locally raised food. So it's been a little bit harder to get people interested in that. And also because the price points can be very different if you're talking about the difference between buying a new ethically made or sustainably made product and a new fast fashion or conventional product. So it's starting to pick up steam, but it's a little bit slow going. And also the other thing that holds back the fashion movement from being as popular as the food movement is the fact that there is no equivalent to the USDA organic label for fashion. There's a few different sort of competing labels. Like you actually do have fair trade fashion. You have like certain standards like Blue Sign or Okotex, which deal with the chemicals that are used. You have GOTS Organic, which like applies to sort of cotton. There's no label that sort of can tell you when you're in the store, like, is this good or bad? Like, can I trust this? And that's just because fashion is so much more complex than food. So much more complex.
Yeah, totally. So what was that like for you, kind of making that transition into more of the clothing side of things? Like, I think for some people, for me, it was more of a natural curiosity of being more in the creative field and seeing like, okay, I've been designing for the actual print side of what apparel is, but I don't understand enough about where that's coming from and how what I'm doing translates to something else further down the line and all this other stuff going on. What was the catalyst for you to getting into more of that intersection?
That's a really good question. I think the catalyst for me was fashion is something that we touch every day. And there's not actually a lot of things like that we do touch every day. that is such a part of our lives. So it can feel really empowering to build a closet or make better choices in terms of your fashion. I mean, sort of like once you have the food portion sort of handled, it's like, what next? Well, you could think about your personal care products, which is sort of a natural progression from food, and then fashion comes after that. And I think what really sucked me in was the fact that nobody else was really writing about it at all. And so it didn't necessarily come all from my own interest, but the fact that every time I would write about these things or the questions that would come in, it was just always about fashion. People had this hunger for, okay, so what does this mean? Or what should I buy? And it was just, people were just more interested in that. And that might be just because there are already so many other people writing very intelligently on food and also beauty and all these different things. So I think I just fell into it more because I was a little bit of a loner in that aspect.
Gotcha. It was interesting too that you brought up a few good points about that translation between food and clothing, and how there's no kind of there's no group like the USDA or anything for clothing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this just completely unregulated Wild West of an industry right now.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think, to that point, like, what do you think needs to happen for people to make, or for more of an average modern consumer to make more of that switch from making better choices in other aspects of their lives to clothing? Because this is a conversation I've had with multiple people of like, how does someone that isn't necessarily paying attention to this, how do they start to care more about where their clothing comes from? Because for food, it's more of like a direct relation to your health and something that you can really point to as saying, I feel better when I do X. Whereas clothing, it seems a lot more kind of ambiguous.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are effects like on your health from overconsumption of fast fashion. They're a little bit less obvious, but they are absolutely there. And I think you're seeing that a lot with the Marie Kondo trend. Whenever I didn't go through the whole series, but there are women in the first few episodes, even single women, and there's always the scene with the closet clean out and just all this stuff piled on the bed. And I think people are getting to the point where they feel, after binging on impulse buys at the mall, I think they're getting the same feeling as after they've binged on junk food, which is like, why did I do that? Weeks later, instead of like, this looks terrible, it's cheap, I don't like it, I can't find anything I want to wear because I have to dig through everything to get to what I like. Like polyester can make you feel really itchy. Also synthetic fibers and rayon, they retain smell a lot more. So there's not, wearing synthetic socks is not good for your feet. There's all these health benefits. Like I said, there's research coming out soon from a nonprofit that's launching in DC around what is on our clothing when it gets to the United States, which is probably similar to the difference between products, beauty and personal care products, and the way they are sold in the EU and the way they're sold here. I don't think that the US is inspecting garments as they come in from these low cost countries to make sure that they're not doused in formaldehyde, various other toxic chemicals that it could affect our health. I mean, there are reports of people who, when they work in stock rooms, opening up boxes straight from, say, Indonesia, and they like open the boxes, and this air comes out of this box, and people end up developing chemical sensitivities, rashes, respiratory problems. So there is definitely building evidence that clothing does have an effect on your health. Now, will it make you skinnier if you buy organic cotton clothing? No, it won't make you skinnier. So, but I do think it just feels like more nourishing, and also it feels really great to sort of more mindful fashion consumer, because then when you go to your closet every day, it's sort of easy to get dressed. And I'm talking to a man right now, so you might not fully understand how much more difficult it is to get dressed when you're a woman in the morning. I think men just naturally have more sustainable wardrobes because you guys can wear whatever you want whenever you want.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, there's so many points that I kind of want to like unwrap a little bit more in that whole thing. And I want to kind of like get back to the Marie Kondo thing, but I also wanted to kind of get into the like male female side of things, just because I think that can be like a very sensitive subject for a lot of people. And it was a piece that we had kind of like exchanged one email back and forth on based on a piece that had come out of yours recently, and just how that whole thing kind of translates to this broader kind of social thing that's happening online right now of people just kind of like putting their opinions out everywhere, and how that's changed this whole landscape. It seems like when you start to look at the sustainability side of like what fashion is and how that translates to all these other aspects of business, you also start to realize that it's so interconnected to all these other things. And it seems like kind of the social fabric piece of it is also something that it plays a big role in how this whole kind of thing is starting to unfold.
Yeah, I mean, fashion, like anything, is very much interconnected with all of the issues that we are dealing with in our time, the socioeconomic factors, race factors, who gets to buy the fashion and who is making the fashion. There are charges that the ethical fashion movement is quite privileged, which I think is just naturally true, because it's like caring about who made your fashion and being able to pay more for your fashion is, I mean, you basically like if you are doing that, you've probably handled the rest of your needs in Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like you got your food, like you like I can care about this now. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like if you can care about it, you should. But yeah, the fashion industry is so interconnected with the world and everything that's going on in the world. And you know, as I was traveling, like that's why I needed to leave New York, because I wanted to meet people around the world, because I was writing about all these what was going on, and I was like, I can't keep typing the word Bangladesh without like going to Bangladesh and meeting people, like I met designers, I met garment workers, I met factory owners, I met everyone who was involved from like the top to the bottom. I met a woman who owned a natural dye factory, all of those things. And it really contributed to my understanding of how connected we are in terms of like I mean, fashion's just like, it's just a feminist issue, because you have women consuming the most amount of fashion, women being marketed to for fashion, and then women making the fashion. But then all of the profits and benefits accrue to men who are at the top of that supply chain.
Totally. Yeah. And it's interesting that it seems like a lot of those conversations almost can't be had, or they end up turning into something else, kind of what I was talking about with this broader social thing going on online, where it starts as one thing and it seems like it kind of just devolves into this other conversation about all these other things that people are upset about. And it seems like it's difficult to kind of keep things on track and about one certain thing without some other person coming in and making it about something else, and then it turning into this really kind of like personal attack kind of thing, and then it all just spirals out of control from there.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I don't think that this thing about social media not being a great place to talk about complex issues is not confined to the world of fashion, for sure. And if like it's interesting that this article that I was mentioning like posed a question of like, does fashion have a diversity problem? Because like the answer is always yes. Does something have a diversity problem? Yes, absolutely. The answer is always yes. There's no like I'm hard pressed to think of like I don't think I can't think of any industries that don't have a diversity problem, especially one that's based so much on image and sort of this idea idea of luxury, you're obvious, like you're just gonna have this diversity problem. And there are ways I think we can address, like we could collectively address these issues of diversity. One of them is, like, I think there should be more financial awards given to people of color who are trying to found brands, because it is very, 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 very hard to found a brand. It's very difficult. Most people will fail. And people of color need more access to capital and more access to mentorship in order to make that happen, because they've historically been deprived of that, and they're still deprived of that today. I think other ways to do that is, I mean, the way I try to do it is I just try to send traffic to small brands who are doing better in all of these different ways. I was looking through my top referrals from ecocult.com, and 90% of them are women owned. And I think that's like a function of the type of people who are like really invested in fashion, and then sustainable fashion, like beneficial fashion on top of that. And then I send to Indian brands or Indian stores that I met abroad, and then a lot of stores that source fairly from artisans from around the world. So my answer to the question of like, how can we make the fashion industry more inclusive, has always been like getting down into the gritty of like measurable actions that I can take to send more work and more like fair work to people who make our clothes in a variety of capacities. And then also sort of looking into these systems and saying like, how can we fix the system as large? Like what is it going to take us to get to a place where people are paid a living wage? What is it going to take to get to a place where, you know, if you want to use the work of artisans, or you're inspired by the work of artisans, like how are we going to get to a place where people can easily, like brands go to those artisans in order to make that, instead of just sort of asking a Chinese factory to like recreate it for them. So I've always been about sort of like measurable action, but that's just because I come from a place just because I come from a journalistic background where everything needs to be fact checked, provable, and sort of I'm always trying to get to the truth of the matter. And I think that social media has gotten to a place in like all areas where, I mean, speaking of the food movement, like you have vegan bloggers who like have been physically sick since 2014, and yet they are continuing to post ever more extreme vegan, like raw ebooks and like fasting, because social media, the algorithm always encourages extreme behavior. And you're not just seeing that in terms of like right-wing propaganda, you're seeing it in terms of like what I would say like is the things of the left wing, like anti-vaccinations and like all of these things. And the fashion industry is not immune to that. Mm-hmm. It's not like, we're not special compared. I mean, we're arguably worse. There's experts who are in this field, like everybody knows that like most of the facts you hear about the fashion industry are not true. Mm-hmm. They're not based on anything real. I mean, you go through like any article that has like really shocking facts, I could go through that article with you and I would be able to debunk like most of them. It would take some work, but that would be like, oh, well, that's where this one comes from. Like mm-hmm. There was an there's a good one. The UN sent out a press release saying that they were founding this new initiative to partner around sustainable fashion and ethical fashion. And so one of these facts they sent out was something like 20% of the world's wastewater globally is from fashion. And I was mm-hmm. like, wow, that's a crazy fact. Like that's an incredible amount of wastewater to come from just fashion. So I was like, I haven't even seen this fact before. Like, wow, okay. So I like emailed them and I was like, where is this fact from? And they're like, oh, it's from this paper. And they're like, went to look at the paper. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, this paper references another paper. So we went over and looked at the other paper. And the paper that this game of telephone happened, where this paper examined one factory, like a group of, or like one or a group of factories in a certain place in India. And they said 20% of the wastewater flowing out of that factory was related to the dyeing process of clothing in that factory.
And
And
it just got
somehow,
blown out to some
yeah,
huge.
globally, the fashion industry is responsible for 1 out of 5 gallons of wastewater. And I was like, well, that's a stretch.
Yeah, that was actually the first article that I had read from yours. And when you started diving into like how that was wrong, that was when you hooked me, because I was like, yes, finally someone is like actually diving into some of this and saying like, where is this coming from? And not only where is it coming from, but the fact that it's just the majority of it's either completely made up or it's stretched to a point where you're just like, that sounds like someone in marketing got a hold of it and like took it a couple levels too far.
Yeah, but the thing is, there's not really much out there to go on. So
Yeah,
it sounds like super weak and boring when I'm like, fashion is not the second most polluting industry in the world, and people are like, well, what is it? I'm like, I'm not really sure.
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So that brings me to a few things. Like, one is, have you received a lot of pushback from some of this? Because it seems like a lot of these little pieces of different industries and kind of like larger issues that you're diving into right now are very hot button issues, where if you're talking to someone and you're telling them like, hey, I understand that this is getting you all riled up, but what you're hearing and what you're reacting to is probably not true. And to try and have that conversation when someone is acting out of more of an emotional response is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it is really difficult. And it just depends on the topic. Like, there's a spectrum of controversial topics. So like on one side you have like I mean, the things that tend to get people riled up is like a lot of the misinformation around animal agriculture. Like, animal agriculture is not in fact responsible for half of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture as a whole is responsible for like is a subset of that. But you know, that's something people get really riled up about. Anything that has to do with veganism. You know, I spent a lot of time sort of defending artisan and indigenous and traditional production to vegans, because like I just would never I like, for example, people think that there's no, like, cows aren't ever killed in India, but that's not true, because India has a very large Muslim population, and there's a very large trade of animal skins in eastern India, sort of near Calcutta. And so there's actually like a glut of cow skins sort of around the world right now, because so many people switch from leather shoes to sneakers for their everyday use. And so there's too much cow skin. And when there's too much cow skin, it's not that people stop eating cows or people stop raising cows, because cow skin is like maybe 5% of the total value of the cow. So you would never, like, you would lose money if you were only raising a cow for 5% of its value by the rest. So like, it might seem like I'm splitting hairs, but the thing is, like, if you don't buy that cow skin, if you're not buying an artisan made product, that cow skin will likely get burned or put in the landfill. And I feel like it's really unfair to sort of tell indigenous people like that what they've traditionally done is morally wrong, because white people have been doing that for a long time in a variety of ways. And I'm sort of like, okay, like, you told them their religion was wrong, and you told them that their clothing was wrong, and now you're gonna go after like their food and like their crafts. Like, come on, I don't think that's really fair. And so, and I actually don't think it's environmentally friendly either. So I just don't think there's any reason to take that away from artisans and say like, you can't use leather, but you can use like polyurethane instead,
Yeah.
which you need to buy from Italy.
Yeah, and it's like, well, this was another one of the things that I had ran into too, which was like a lot of these larger companies are kind of like, at least the cool thing that I'm seeing now in the outdoor industry is talking about all these technical pieces and technical products and how they're innovating on these different things. And it's like, that's all well and good, but at the base level, a family-run business is not going to have access to that sort of technology. And like, there's just these very conflicting, like split things going on. And so it brings me to kind of my next point, which is like, it seems like from someone on the outside that may just be starting to pay attention to more of this, you kind of go from this level of 0 to 100 really quick, which is like, I didn't know this existed, to, oh my God, here's this massive information and it's all conflicting.
Yeah.
How does someone start to put those pieces together and really understand how to make decisions in this world where you're just being hit with all this information from every angle?
You know, I think that I would like to challenge the base assumption of your question, which is the assumption that the way forward is to expect consumers to become experts in okay, like first we wanted to become experts in food. Fine, that's, you need food to live. Now they need to become experts in like personal care products. And now we're going to ask them to become experts in fashion, which is so complex, right? Like you have like a layer, like you have everything that comes with the food. And then you add on like 5 more layers on top of that. And it gets so complicated, and you get into science and you get into chemistry and you get into like agriculture, and it's just so much. And so, you know, the past few years, I've been sort of backing up and away from like this like I'm tripping people anymore. I'm saying like my message is, if you really care about this, here are some brands that I have looked into myself and I can like with a 90% confidence say that they're good. And if I find out later they're bad, I'll take them out of this like little list, right? However, like if you really care about this, the way forward is to like, you know, like donate to some of these organizations who have experts who are trying to figure these things out and are at the table with large brands to tell them like about what they should do next. So for example, like there's two, like when you find out as a consumer, I mean, there's so many things to be upset about in the fashion industry, right? But let's take indigenous rainforests. So let's take indigenous rainforests. Indigenous rainforests are under threat from the production of rayon viscose, which is like what they do is they take trees, they pulp them, and then they like put them together with a bunch of like toxic chemicals, and then make fibers out of it. And a lot of times those trees are coming from like clear cut indigenous rainforests. It's sort of like, it's like the like rayon viscose is like the palm oil of fashion, right? Okay, so when you hear about that, your first, like everyone's first reaction these days, because we're like all like steeped in neoliberalism, is to be like, that's terrible. Where do I buy responsible rayon viscose? And that's not the answer. The question you should be asking, the question you should be asking is okay, one is, what companies have made a commitment to not sourcing this, like, which is a start, right? But also like, who's working on this? Like, who are the experts? And then give them your money, or like, or sign up for their newsletter or whatever, like show them support, because, or you can email your favorite, like when you pull out your thing and you see that it's made of viscose, instead of feeling like personally liable for the rainforest that went into your thing and being like, oh man, I'm the worst consumer ever, you email that company and say like, look, I really love your t-shirt. Like it's super soft and wonderful. And as soon as it gets holes in it, I'm going to replace it. and I would like to replace it with another one like it. However, I cannot do that right now in good conscience because it's made of rayon viscose, and I have not seen any commitments or information from you around getting certified rainforest-free rayon viscose. But like, I mean, that's still a lot to ask of customers, right? Like, it's still sort of like, it's still asking sort of a really high level of commitment that most people aren't willing to do. And I'm a big fan of like throwing money at experts who can fix it for you. So if you really love chimpanzees and you're the kind of person that is upset about rainforest deforestation, you can donate to Canopy Planet, or Canopy Style, which is their style arm, and like they'll like work on it for you on your behalf. Like that's your vote. That's voting with your dollar more than like, because most large companies, like, they're not going to notice if you don't buy from them unless you tell them you're not buying from them. So like, unless you're marching through the mall and stopping in each like shitty store and saying, I was going to buy from you, but I'm not. And then going to the next store and going, I absolutely used to buy from you and I'm not buying you anymore. But then it still doesn't matter because like all of these like poor 19-year-old salespeople are like, what? I mean, it's just like this whole conscious consumption thing is like, it's sort of a waste of our time and money. Like, really, we need to start thinking about like being good citizens instead of just being good consumers.
Totally. Well, it's interesting you brought up that like yelling at 19-year-olds piece too, because it's funny how the shift of generations has happened where I watch like someone like my grandparents or someone walk up to someone that's supposed to be at a customer service level and just like ream into them and just let them have it. And it's like, listen, this is not how business works anymore. They're not connected anything to the people making decisions here. So you yelling at them is really doing absolutely nothing but wasting your own energy.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very well documented that as these companies got larger and larger and more international, that locally you have like people just have less and less power because like the people who are making decisions are never in the communities that they're working in. They're never like really part of that community.
Which feeds back into that kind of privilege piece that you were talking about of there being this gap between the people that are kind of able to afford more of this stuff or pay more attention to it compared to the people that are, you know, like might not necessarily see that information or even be able to act on it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, if you have the privilege to know about all this and have the time to think about it and have the time to afford like to buy new clothing, I sort of like, you know, I kind of think about it as being like an art patron, you know, like, you know, not everyone can afford to buy really expensive art. If you can't afford to buy really expensive art, go buy it from a woman, you know, or like buy it from a person of color. But if you can't afford to buy really expensive art, like, you know, just follow them on Instagram and see, you know, see what they're up to and like go see their show at the museum. Like, I think you do what you can. And I tell people that if you can't afford like the expensive artisanal stuff, there are ways not system. You can buy secondhand. There is a glut of secondhand clothing on the market. When you drop things off at the Goodwill, like Goodwill can only sell like maybe 20% of what we donate. Then they package it up, they ship it off, and I think something like 60% of it is shipped out like outside of the country to other countries. And so we have just too much of it. So I always tell people like before you go shopping for new stuff, like clean out your closet and then like go consign it and get a little bit of cash and then like buy secondhand. Like that's a great way to be a super sustainable consumer on a budget. And then the other thing is like if you like it can be a little bit hard to only buy secondhand fashion because like sometimes people just want the dignity of buying something new and fresh off the rack, and I understand that. Like, so I would say like the next best thing to do is you can only afford fast fashion, fine. I'm not going to judge you. Just like be kind to yourself as well and be thoughtful about only buying the fast fashion that you like really, really enjoy. So if you're like, you know, if you can really only afford fast fashion, like I still have things from Zara and H&M that I bought in 2009, they're still going. And like, that's a good piece of clothing. Like that is sustainable. Like I might have bought it from a fast fashion brand, but I still love it. I still wear it. It's still in one piece, shockingly. And like the fact that I've worn it so much, like that's one of the most sustainable things I could do.
Mm-hmm. I want to kind of tie that into what you had mentioned before getting into that little kind of piece of what you were talking about too, which was it seems like in my mind, there's kind of these two, not necessarily conflicting, but two different sides of how to better approach these sort of sustainability things, which is one, like you were talking about, giving more money to people that are looking into that sort of thing and really at the forefront of kind of technology and how to do this better moving forward. But then two, invest in more of these kind of like local markets and communities and kind of like going back to the roots. How do you see those two things as how do you see those two things butting up against each other and working as things kind of move forward? Because it seems like sometimes they're kind of in conflict with each other where you're seeing, like, let's say RPET, like recycled bottle material, where it's like, okay, this is you're getting rid of something that would be in the environment, but at the same time, it's not circular. It's not something that, you know, you're ever technically going to get rid of. You just kind of transformed it into something else. And like, you might get more use out of it, but at the end of the day, it's still not going to degrade like something that's more natural.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that so first of all, it is not technologically feasible to have a completely sustainably made wardrobe at this point. And we all have to work within the parameters that are given to us. So, like, I don't think one today who lives in a city, or like sort of anyone, like, I think anyone who's not like actively living in like an indigenous community is going to have some sort of synthetic in their wardrobe because it is a high performance fiber. It's like you just can't have, like, you need stretch, right? Like there are no natural fiber bathing suits. The ones that are like crochet, and if you look at the fine print, they'll be like, don't go in the water. And so you just need synthetic fibers to live life in our society today. Like raincoats, like unless you want to put on a really heavy, like old waxed canvas raincoat, you might not want to do that. Like having sort of technical gear for cold weather. You could have a fur coat, but it's not quite the same, you know? So so we just need, like, at this point we have to accept that we have synthetic fibers in our life, and if we're going to have synthetic fibers in our life, like, they should be from recycled sources instead of virgin oil.
Yeah, so then how does that kind of play into the other side of it, which is supporting more of a local artisan kind of like community driven thing where you have to have some sort of that balance. Like you're working to try and better two sides of kind of the same coin.
Yeah, I mean, I love, like, obviously I love artisanal, like artisan made fashion. It does not fulfill all of my needs as a consumer, and so it's just about supporting artisans where you can. And yeah, because you're just not going to get artisan made denim, maybe from Japan, but so I think every consumer is going to be different in what is going to make them happy, and fortunately there's so many different ways to be sustainable. Like, around in like ponchos and kimonos and like embroidered things and like upcycled patchwork stuff, or like upcycled saris. Like, you're gonna have a great time with artisanal fashion. If you're the kind of person who likes everything really minimalist, like, you're probably gonna go for like real merino wool knit things from Scandinavia. And If you're an athlete, you're probably going to go for like recycled polyester athletic gear. They're all valuable, and I wouldn't pass judgment on anyone as long as they are buying with purpose and thoughtfulness. Only things that are striving their best to only buy things that they know that they're going to get a lot of use out of, instead of sort of just being like, oh, well, it's $5 on sale, so I'll just throw it in the shopping cart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like that kind of just quick buy something and toss it kind of deal, or like this buyer's remorse kind of like, well, it was on sale, or like I saw an ad for it, so I'm going to get it kind of thing,
Yeah.
is starting to have its last leg almost. And it's interesting to see businesses still kind of push that model. And so I'm always interested in businesses that are putting out content that is less about, the kind of like beat you over the head, buy thing, but more of like, how are we involving our community? What are we doing to, get you more information so that you can make better choices, regardless of whether that's buying or supporting us or someone else?
It's interesting that you say that, because marketing sustainable fashion is so difficult. And I think the only brand that's really doing it well, authentically, is Patagonia. But Patagonia is not a fashion brand. It's an outdoor apparel brand that appeals to hippies who think about nature all the time, or like hippies and outdoor people. So they can get away with running advertising campaigns where they tell people to buy less of their stuff, because then people go out and buy more of their stuff, because like they're excited about contributing to a brand that they trust and buying something really high quality and wearing it for a really long time. Whereas I haven't seen any other brands pull this off. I mean, you have H&M, and they have so much messaging around sustainability, and yet like the more they talk about their sustainability initiatives, the more people hate them.
Yeah, they get clogged.
Yeah, like people hate them just for trying, and then you have Eileen Fisher, who, it was interesting because they had a thing where they were like trying to reach millennials through their sustainability, and I was like, that's never going to work, because you don't make millennial clothing. You will always like, I'm going to wear Eileen Fisher someday, not now,
Yep.
I'm looking forward to like when I reach 45, it's gonna be like, now it's time for Eileen Fisher, but like not at this moment in time, as much as I love what she's doing, but so it's not a marketing plan to do sustainability. I mean, Levi's is doing pretty well in their sustainability, but that's because their value that they're offering consumers is not like, you don't have to feel like guilt-free denim. It's like, look, like you still see our denim in the vintage stores. Like, that you're gonna like, these are like like we do jeans really well. We always have. And the fact that they're trying to do so in a way that's sort of sustainable and beneficial, like, goes well with this. They're always marketing message, which is like high quality denim that you will live in. And so they are pulling it off to an extent, but it's just not a marketing message to talk about sustainability, because as soon as you start talking about sustainability, then people's like minds go into responsibility. Then they're like, well, I think there's this unconscious, like, it starts this unconscious thing of like, well, I shouldn't actually be spending money, or like, wouldn't the most sustainable thing not to be like to not buy anything? And so then they're not buying from your brand. But then as soon as that part of the brain switches off, they're over buying like a fast fashion brand that makes them feel hot. So it's a tricky thing to educate your consumers. And I always tell brands, especially small brands or small designers, like, don't educate your consumers. Let people like me educate your consumers. And then you're there to offer them the upbeat, happy solution to all of the shit that I just threw at them over here. Yeah. Instead of like don't put, like, I was talking to one Indian brand, and I was looking at her Instagram, and she was talking about like air pollution in Jaipur, and I was like, I know, I see what you're trying to do here, but like, first of all, your brand is not offering the solution to air pollution in Jaipur. You're offering a solution to like textile waste.
You still there? It looks like you got cut off real quick. Give it a second. Hopefully it kicks back on. Well, guess I'm talking here by myself until Alden gets back on. Hopefully she can get reconnected. Give it a few minutes here, and if she's not back, then I will close out, and that will be it. Hey,
Hi.
how's it going? Sorry about that. Looks like the connection
Hey,
dropped.
so my technical issues are related to me not wanting to buy new electronic products. My laptop's microphone is crackly. I also lost earbuds last week, and I was trying to find them before I went out and bought new ones. And so I couldn't charge my phone and have my earbuds in at the same time.
Gotcha. No worries. It's all good. Can we
Can
pick
you
up
hear me
right where we left
okay?
off?
I mean, I know the quality is going to be like really bad, but
Oh, no, it's not bad at all. It's great.
oh, okay. Okay, great. Then let's keep going.
Awesome. Cool. Do you know, I'm not quite sure where we left off, but let's try and pick up where it cut
Right.
out.
Yeah. So I was talking about this Indian brand as an example.
Yeah.
So she was talking about her Instagram feed. And I said, even though you're putting yourself in opposition to air pollution and saying it's a problem, you still have a picture of air pollution in your Instagram feed. And so now when people see your brand, they feel that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want people to feel bad. You want them to feel happy and positive and beautiful and all of those things. So I was like, stop talking about air pollution on your feed and start just putting up beautiful pictures or inspirational things or pictures related to the kind of world that you want to see in India and in the fashion industry. And let me and news outlets do the reporting on these things. And then you're ready to welcome people into your brand and your world that offers sort of a better way forward.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something I don't think very many people have brought up. And you're totally right, because when you're seeing a lot of people post some of this stuff, the majority of it seems to be kind of doom and gloom, like, the planet's screwed, we're screwed, like, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like, buy from us because we'll help, and you're just like, whoa, okay, well, you just hit me with this huge thing. How am I supposed to go out and do that now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
I don't think necessarily shopping is the solution. And the way I put it is like, the reason why I buy sustainable and ethical fashion is that I don't want to be a part of the problem, but I don't think that that absolves me of, like, I don't think that's the final action. I think that is sort of like a nice to have. But like there's so much more to do, and I think that really the answer to this lies in legislation. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, just full stop. Like, you know, there is like, I mean, there is something to be said for the fact that all the consumer attention after the Rana Plaza factory collapse in 2013, in which more than 1,100 people died. That led to the formation of a legally binding coalition of mostly European brands, and that coalition did basically acted as the agency was supposed to inspections and essentially like not shut down, but like pull all orders from factories that weren't complying, which led to them being shut down, or shutting down operations. And so that's great. But that's an extreme example because, first of all, like, yeah, now people aren't dying making our clothing, but like we still haven't, like, that's the limit of what consumer awareness can do, because everyone agreed nobody should die making our clothes. But then you get into like, okay, like what about living wage? Like, what does living
Mm-hmm.
wage look like? How do we get to a living wage? Like, what is the chemistry behind, like, how do we clean the rivers in Bangladesh? Like, who's dumping water? Like, who's dumping wastewater? How do we stop that from happening? Like, that gets into things like consumers are not equipped to deal with or follow. And that's where consumer pressure like really, really breaks down. And that's why I feel like we need strong institutions and with experts to figure out the solution to these problems and then implement them.
Yeah. Yeah, it just seems so difficult because it seems like in today's political climate, that seems like something that is also a difficulty because people are, so divided on all of these issues. And so it's kind of like this, it seems like what I keep hearing from a lot of people is it's kind of these dualities or like push and pull of these different sides of the same conversation where you have to be able to hold both of these viewpoints at once or together in order to really understand how it's all playing out, because you can't just, like, let's say, push government aside and say I don't want anything to do with that, but you also can't just decide that you're going to purchase from anywhere. It's kind of like a mix of these two different things.
Yeah, I mean, life is complicated. It's
Yeah, so
complicated.
what has it been like diving into all of these different things, and just because it's so cool to hear you just be able to talk about all of this stuff and bring all of it up, because there's not, like I had said when we first started talking, there's not a lot of people at this intersection, and so to be able to hold all of that information at once and kind of pull it all out just talking is something that not a lot of people are able to do.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'm really proud of the fact that I've sort of a self-taught expert in this area. And so yeah, I'm very proud of that. So thank you. And I'm always like, I mean, because I wrote about personal finance for women for a while, I got very good at taking extremely complex issues and figuring out like what is important here and what do people need to know in order to be a better version of themselves. And so like I've broken down like how to do different aspects of your taxes,
Mm-hmm.
and now I'm doing the same thing for fashion, but like there are questions that might seem silly that a lot of experts wouldn't necessarily think of. But I think the one thing that social media really gave me was the ability to see like what some experts might consider dumb questions and like figure out the answer. So for example, like are clothes compostable? Like that's a question I think that people have who want to be more sustainable, because they're thinking like, well, I don't want to donate my torn up rag of a shirt to Goodwill. So like, can I compost it? The answer is probably not. But and then you have things like, you know, where should I donate my clothes? And I'm always trying to find like the real answer to that question instead of the sort of facile or popular answer to that question. And sometimes that makes me unpopular. But I've said this before, like I do so much research and I'm willing to change my position on something, but because this whole industry, like this whole sustainable fashion thing is so new, if I do like a couple hours of digging, I'm pretty confident that what I've found is new. You know, like there are like I said, there are some other experts who are like working on these things, but they're not necessarily the about it. So I just like I do as much digging as I can to figure out what the answer is, and my blog posts can get a little bit long in that regard because these things are really complex and there's always like the and but I'm always trying to figure out like, okay, like what do people need to know in order to be a good consumer, and sort of answer their question honestly and without judgment.
Yeah, and so we've talked for a while kind of about more of the things that people can do to better understand a lot of these things and make better decisions. What are some things that you've learned along this whole process of yours that are kind of big no's or big issues within the industry as a whole that you've seen kind of continue over time?
Sure. I think like you know, usually I'm sort of non-judgmental about this, but like one trend that I've seen that really hurts my heart is like super ultra fast cheap fashion, sort of like the Misguideds and the Boohoo's of the world. Like it's just like it's if people give H&M a lot of shit, like they are way worse. And this sort of trend of like seeing something on Instagram and thinking like that you should be able to buy it within 5 days for $10. That is crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy pants. Like it's just crazy to me, and it makes me really upset. And I don't understand that world myself. And I think you can get a lot of the fun of cheap fashion again out of secondhand fashion. But seeing that speed up so much, I don't know where it's going, but it's nowhere good. The other thing that I've seen that I really don't like is this sort of it's quite cynical to me, which is companies jumping on the vegan trend with synthetic fabrics. So I like Boohoo was like, we're banning wool. And everyone was like, what are you talking about? Because they were like, oh, like animal rights. And everyone's like, you are so full of it. You do not care about the rights of anyone or anything. You just want to like make your fashion cheaper and then get like a pat on the back for it. They actually like reversed themselves within a day because everyone was like, come on, really? And like you saw that at ASOS where they were like, we're banning animal products. So they're banning silk. Well, what are you going to replace silk with? Rayon viscose and polyester. So I find it's really disheartening to me that people are using like are covering up companies are covering up the fact that they're just trying to make everything cheaper by saying it's about animal rights, or even worse, by saying it's more sustainable when it's absolutely not. I mean, even like I would say if you want to get something fluffy and furry, there are so many secondhand furs that want a home, and do that instead of like buying a fake fur coat. I mean, I look at those and I just see like a giant poof ball of microfibers.
Yeah.
And microfibers are really scary too, because like, first of all, so microfibers wash out of our clothing whenever we walk, like whenever we have any clothing, they have microfibers. But synthetic microfibers from polyester, nylon, all these different things, they, especially fluffy polyester fleece coats, every time we wash them, the fibers go right through all the filters and into the ocean and the rivers. And they're so that, like, these were just discovered like 5 years ago, and then scientists are starting to realize like how ubiquitous they are. Like they took samples around the world and they found microfibers in like 97% of tap water samples. This is also not limited to tap water. They're also in bottled water, because bottled water is tap water that's been sort of like refined, but often not enough to take out the microfibers. We're also breathing them in. Like they're just in our body. When we eat seafood, we eat microfibers and microplastics. It's like, and this is another way in which fashion is affecting our health, which is microfibers, when they're in the water, they sort of suck over, like they suck up any toxins that they encounter. So when those microfibers into your body, now this is a very clear example of something that's really scary, and there's nothing you can do about it. It doesn't really matter what fashion you buy or anything. I mean, you could get a guppy friend and wash your polyester in there, but like, this problem is way bigger than you and me, friend. And what I'd really like to see is people realize that the first step should be that every single washing machine sold in the United States should have a filter on it. But then you still have a ridiculous amount of microfibers coming out of Asia. So like, we need to think bigger.
Yeah. So how do you stay with all of this, like we had talked about before, kind of doom and gloom, or like just a lot of very heavy subjects that you're diving into as a journalist, but also as it relates to the apparel stuff? How do you stay positive throughout all of this? And are there things that you're kind of looking to as you're seeing all these kind of pieces come at you that you can point to as saying, this is a really good step forward?
Okay, so positivity, good question. Well, there is a lot of exciting investment going on right now in recycling technologies and other technologies. And I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a lot of really cool things come out. Everything's sort of in the lab right now, or in pilot facilities, but like, there's some cool stuff going on. So if you're a science nerd, like if you're listening to this and you're in high school and you're really into science, like go into textile science. It is the place to be right now. It is so exciting. So that gets me really excited. Other things that get me excited are, I think people are more aware, but I'm and like the UK is now talking about this, like at the government level, they're starting to sort of look at fashion companies like Boohoo and say like, what are you doing? And sort of demand that companies do more around sustainability. What I was talking about with the Bangladesh Fire and Safety Accord, which required, like, the difference between Bangladesh in 2013 and Bangladesh today in terms of just like the factories, it's a huge difference. And I don't think people realize, like, people always talk about Rana Plaza, which was a huge watershed moment, but they keep talking about it as if like nothing has changed in Bangladesh. Things have changed. Like, factories for export are kind of awesome now in terms of their safety and accountability. That might backslide because Bangladesh is trying to sort of kick the accord out. But like we can get together and we can fix things on a very basic level. Like there is something to be done there. And so like that was see Vietnam, and a lot of the factories there that are very modern and doing amazing things in terms of sustainability. So I think there's a movement. It just got started like 5 years ago or 6 years ago. And the progress we've made in that time has been off the wall. I mean, like, I never, like, if you'd asked me 6 years ago, like, if you'd asked me 6 years ago if, you know, there's like 6 of the biggest fashion companies in the world would be talking this seriously about sustainable fashion, I would not have believed you.
Yeah.
Would not.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the stuff even within the last couple of years, it seems like a lot of things have ramped up pretty quickly, not only in terms of like people's understanding and awareness of what's happening, but also within companies and changes that are being made in a lot of these bigger companies at scale that I think is really helping to push a lot of those factories into having to up their standards for the rest of everyone that could potentially use them as a source for, you know, their manufacturing in the future.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like every time I talk to a new exciting textile, like a new company or startup or lab, like they're getting their money from fashion companies that are eager to support what they're doing, because these fashion companies see the writing on the wall. And a lot of these grants that they're getting they're not like equity investments, right? Like these companies, like large companies, are just like giving the money away because they're like, we are here for it. We want to find a solution. The solution's not here yet, so we're just going to give you this money, and like hopefully it works out. If it does work out, great, everyone can use it. If it doesn't work out, okay, we'll figure something else. Like we'll support the next thing that's coming along, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, I agree. So if you were to kind of wrap this up, what are some things that you would point people towards in order to kind of, if they want to understand more of this information, whether that's you or some places that you go to kind of stay up to speed on some things that are happening? Because I think what you had mentioned before too with the science side of it is like, if you're not really a science nerd, that's something that it would potentially be really difficult for people to try and, you know, stay up to date on.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, like, definitely come to ecocult.com, sign up for the newsletter. It's not just about the stuff I write. I also, in the newsletter every other week, I send out all the latest news and interesting things that are going on in the industry. So a lot of thought-provoking things in there. There's other, like, if you are not a science nerd, I would say, like, there's a way into this for everyone. Like if you're an animal lover, if you care deeply about indigenous rights, if you care about like organic food, like all of these things relate back to fashion. If you care about climate change, there's a way for everyone to get involved in this. You just have to find the thing that you're really passionate about, and learn more about that.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, I appreciate it. We're going to have to get on one of these in the future and see what more you learn, just because everything seems like it's moving so fast right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been really interesting to talk with you. You asked great questions, and I'm sorry again about the technical issues, but
oh no, it's all good. Yeah, it's kind of just the name of the game. I feel like a lot of people assume that just because we're in the 21st century that all this stuff works, and that's almost never the case. So
yeah, totally. Well,
awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime, and I appreciate you being on.
Thanks. We'll talk soon.
Yep. Bye-bye.